I returned to college because of one bad day at work. I had quietly dropped out of community college some 6 years prior, and since then had experienced varying degrees of satisfaction across workforces in Redding, California, my hometown. At the time, late into the spring of 2023, I felt I had a pretty cool job. I worked at a radio station, got to be on air regularly, and worked with local businesses. For 2 weeks, though, I felt a slump. The company I worked at wasn't huge. The radio industry I worked in was shrinking, is still shrinking, in fact. And in the middle of all this, walking out after a late night at the office, the boss threw me some criticism for something that had never been my responsibility. By the time I walked in the next morning, I was poring through the catalog of summer classes. Psychology, from my perspective at the time, was just one of many intriguing options. I always had an interest in people, and in better understanding how we function, but what truly drew me into the field was a memory of one professor in particular. I had taken his abnormal psychology course in 2017, now renamed to Psychological Disorders, and found that he still taught classes at Shasta College. Sitting in his human sexuality class that summer, I realized how much 6 years can change a person. The man who was once a devout Christian struggling with how his faith treated outgroups was now a medicine-journeying spiritualist. The through line between both versions of the man, though, was the inherent care he unwaveringly expressed for every person he came in contact with. Perhaps without realizing it, this experience stuck with me as I transferred to Southern Oregon University. The idea that a person can change drastically without losing the parts of themselves I valued. I landed at SOU for two reasons. The first, it was slightly cheaper than going to a California university because of a sweetheart deal with my home county and SOU. Any high school graduates from Shasta County, and any Shasta College students who pursued an associate's degree for transfer, automatically became eligible for 2 years of in-state tuition pricing here at SOU. It's a wonderful program, and I owe whoever came up with it quite a lot. The second major draw of SOU was how close it was to home. The mountain pass may become impassable for the cold part of the year, but otherwise getting home is an easy 2-hour drive across the greatest roadway in the nation, Interstate 5. Before getting into the impact of specific classes and projects, I'd like to recognize how important the social aspect of SOU's psychology department has been for me. There were a few classes where I felt the social connections I made were more important than the class itself. Some difficult classes, behavioral neuroscience in particular, were essentially only possible because I was surrounded by smart, competitive students. It instilled in me a similar competitive spirit, and even when I didn't match them, I was all the better for it. I've also been exposed to elements of personal growth I never would have found on my own. Through the psychology cohort, I've become a member of an a cappella group thanks to a great friend's prodding. I'm writing for a genuine, live broadcast soap opera next term because of a chance connection with the president of the Creative Writing Club in one of Dr. Taylor's summer classes. I suppose that's the college experience, but it's an experience I may have missed if not for this program. Far and away, my most treasured accomplishment in my time at SOU is the final project in psychopharmacology. Psychopharm was the first course I took with Dr. Krauss, though it only beats out behavioral neuroscience by 2 days as I took them simultaneously. The psych department at SOU is full of excellent orators, but the way Dr. Krauss lectures clicked with me far more than any other professor. Krauss's courses are heavily information-dense, but his engaging, consistent presentations reformed the way I intake lectures, as I peer back through my notes much more consistently now than I did when I started. The crown jewel, though, was the final project. Essentially a 10-minute voiced-over literature review on a psychopharmacology topic, I felt abnormally prepared for the assignment. It incorporated two elements I loved, one in psychology, where I poured through research to draw out further conclusions, and one in my personal or work life, with voiceover and radio settings. To this day, it remains the only perfect score I received on a final project in any of my psychology classes, and I am incredibly proud to have achieved it. That project, in fact, is the reason I feel so confident in my workflow for this project. An equally important experience was in Dr. Taylor's History and Systems of Psychology course. The main project, spanning the later portion of the term, assigns small groups of students to replicate an older experiment from different facets of psychology. My group decided to replicate Stanley Milgram's Lost Letters experiment, and it provided a number of challenges that changed my perceptions on research. Firstly, I was shocked on just how little information on the actual process of running the experiment was included in Milgram's write-up. There is no information on how long the experiment ran for, nor how wide of an area the letters were dispersed to. On one hand, this made it more difficult to replicate exactly, but on the other hand, it gave us an opportunity to engage in critical thinking and logical conclusions to determine the missing pieces of the original outline. Secondly, I got to experience firsthand just how awkward the process of an experiment can be. While it can be justified somewhat in the name of science, I was personally responsible for distributing 100 pieces of litter throughout Ashland in the form of phony lost letters. It changed my idea on how experiments run. Psychologists aren't inherently immune to feelings of awkwardness. They just run the experiment awkwardly. Finally, the biggest takeaway was that even if an experiment turned no statistically significant data, as ours did, it can still be personally gratifying. Even though our data essentially meant nothing at the end of the day, presenting to the rest of the class exactly how we went about gathering the nothing data was fulfilling. Individual exploration, which I took in winter term of 2024, was an elucidating experience. Having never been to therapy myself, and having been somewhat wary of attending therapy, I took the course as a personal experiment in boundary pushing. The result was worth it. First and foremost, it gave me a much clearer understanding of why people with largely average experiences attend therapy. I tend to err on the side of emotional control in my personal life, so the idea of deciding to unpack burdens in front of another person, a stranger no less, seemed incomprehensible without having a genuine disorder of some kind. Firsthand, though, the power of a private room with someone who has no connection to, and thus no ability or reason to interfere with, my outside life was tremendous. Even without the comfy chairs stereotypical in the therapy setting, I felt compelled and, more importantly, able to share deeply personal information, and to unpack it in the presence of another person. Secondly, the experience brought me to the realization that practicing therapy may lie outside of my ability for the foreseeable future. It takes quick, apt responses, with high stakes for failing to keep up. In my personal life, these quick responses are something I often struggle with. Even in the moment, I knew some of the statements and questions I brought to my graduate student were curveballs, out of the blue, or just sticky, difficult topics to navigate. Had I been in the other role, I could not have responded half as well as he did. It isn't the answer I was looking for going into the experience, but it remains the most true. It will take an exceptional amount of practice in my daily life, not just in the course of the clinical mental health counseling program, to become comfortable with those situations. Despite the previous statement, the CMHC program isn't off the table for me. It is, however, going to be significantly delayed. My sweetheart deal runs out after winter term, meaning no more in-state tuition. Despite having lived here in Ashland for nearly 2 years now, I would have to live in Oregon for another 2 years while not attending college to return to in-state resident status. Fortunately, regardless of my next steps, I plan to stay in Ashland for the foreseeable future. This means a job, probably full-time. I will be using the resources SAU has provided, but it's likely that I don't end up with a job in a psych-related field immediately. My position at the dining hall on campus will serve as my income until something more apt is found. I'll have a degree, of course, but little to no experience to accompany it. I had hoped the ONET job matcher would turn up more psych-related career paths, but unfortunately the program is very accurate in identifying interests. It showed me 3 versions of a job I already enjoyed before starting my second bout of college. I am very likely to return to commercial radio as, hopefully, a path to a career in commercial voiceover in the near future. It's been a passion of mine for quite some time, and I enjoy working in that field. Both my student work experience at Jefferson Public Radio and my happenstance stumblings into audio production with the film club have made me much more confident in my ability as an audio engineer, the behind-the-scenes part of the radio business. Regardless of the particular field I end up working in as I leave Southern Oregon University, I can say with confidence that my sense of self-efficacy has drastically increased as a result of my college experience. My interactions in the psychology department, both in class with professors and around Ashland with the other students, have created a sense of ability I didn't have before. Whether it's finding scholarly sources, writing in styles I hadn't considered before, or pushing myself into new social situations, I am confident in myself and my ability to succeed.